Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex forecast. Hope everybody's having a great weekend. Last week, the dollar traded into the lower part of the range, which I highlighted to you previously from here down to here. We're crisscrossing the 2 and 7 year breakouts, and we're doing so between this low and this high. And going into this week, because we are right at the previous low in this range bottom, but also we still have a weak dollar, I do think the best opportunities will be in the franc and also the yen and the euro pairs next week. So quick look at the economic calendar. As always, you can see there's not too much coming up next week. And in fact, we have a pretty clear run. We've got some CPI out of Canada and also the UK. However, there isn't really anything, also New Zealand, but there isn't anything here we really need to plan for in terms of short-term trading. So pretty clear run in terms of the news data and risk event next week. Okay, so quick look at the scores. You can see that going into this week, there are a number of changes here in the scorecards, and this is good because this is showing there are opportunities coming into the markets. We did previously, towards the beginning of this year, we had a number of these major currencies below or between the +2 and -2 lower bound and upper bound. So what this was basically saying was there's a lack of opportunities, but now we're really starting to see opportunities come in. So the first thing to note here is that the Swiss franc is absolutely the #1 long idea heading into next week. And I do favor Swiss franc longs versus the Aussie. We can look at the US dollar, but I also like the Swiss franc against the yen. So that's Swiss franc yen to the upside. And also the New Zealand dollar. Now, although the US dollar and the Australian dollar have lower absolute scores at -3, I do really like the Swiss franc pairs and even the euro pairs next week versus those currencies which are really showing a lack of momentum. So the yen and the New Zealand dollar. You could also look at the pound is lacking a bit of momentum, but because this is actually in the positive side of the scorecards, I'm not going to be looking at that this week. So I will be looking at euro and Swiss franc versus the Australian dollar, versus the US dollar, also versus the New Zealand dollar, and also versus the Japanese yen. And with the Canadian dollar, what's interesting, where we had the interest rate decision last week, although this is kind of bearish to neutral, it is strengthening slightly in the scorecards. And so as a kind of a bit of a range play, what we're going to be also looking at is the New Zealand dollar and the Japanese yen versus the Canadian dollar next week, because it's a bit of a follow through. We're going to look at the Canadian dollar. I do think we get a bit of near-term strength next week. And I like the Canadian dollar next week versus the currencies here, which are showing real weakness in terms of momentum. Okay, so let's have a look at the individual currencies before moving on to the markets themselves, starting with the dollar index. And the dollar has actually been bearish. It's been a short in the scorecards all year. But we are approaching a key area of support. So we're kind of bearish, but at a key area of support. There is a chance we come down to the 100.39. So I'm not particularly bullish. I'm not super bullish going into next week because we could come down a bit lower. And again, it would not surprise me if we did pull down a little bit lower and tested the 100.39. But because of where we are, I do favor going into this week those Forex pairs which have the momentum on their side, because the dollar is bearish and has been bearish, but we're seeing, the Japanese yen and the New Zealand dollar, for example, currencies which have been kind of bullish or even bullish to neutral, now turning bearish for the first time. So I think there's actually more to go in those currencies with momentum as opposed to the dollar. So I am bearish on the dollar, and I will be looking at euro dollar to the upside. We'll look at US dollar Swiss franc to the downside, but I just favor those currencies with momentum to the short side, New Zealand and yen, personally next week. Next is the euro. Now the euro traded into its previous high, and it is attempting to break out. And even if the euro is going to come down, and I do think we could see the euro back down towards the lows, especially as a recession or a slowdown takes hold in the US and globally towards the end of the year. But for the time being, the euro is increasing its score in the scorecard, so on a 4-week forwards looking basis. And there's nothing to say the euro couldn't push a bit higher first. before starting to roll over in this area. So as it currently stands, I am bullish on the euro relative to the other currencies. Next is the pound. Now, previously I highlighted the major reversal in the pound above this area. However, what I stated to you was that I do think that this is going to fail. This breakout is going to fail. It's such a big breakout that, there may be some volatility. We may even push back up into the highs. It doesn't mean that it's going to go straight down next week. However, if you look at the price action here, you can see that this is extremely bearish with an outside engulfing daily candle back below, so a close back below the major breakout level. So we are still at a very important juncture in the pound. My view is that it does come lower. Even if we go up a little bit more, over the next week or so, I do think at some point in the near future, as the dollar bounces or bottoms in the scorecards, I do think we're going to see this roll over. And we also saw the pound weakening in the scorecards this week. And it's been one of the best performers in the scorecards. We've been looking at pound Aussie to the upside, pound CAD to the upside, etc. But now we're starting to see it peak in the scorecards. So on a 4-week forward-looking basis, the chances are for some softening in the pound. Next is the Swiss franc. This is my favorite long play heading into next week, and I have been tracking this major move. I've been saying to you all the way back here that this major breakout, look for this to rally this year. Looking for the Swiss franc up to 116, 1.16, 1.17, and it's really only just getting started this next leg up. So any pullback in the Swiss franc is absolutely viewed as an opportunity, and the best opportunity, in fact, next week to look for longs, and that would be especially New Zealand franc to the downside, franc yen to the upside, but also US dollar franc lower, and also going to be looking at Aussie franc lower next week. Next is the yen. We do have the new BOJ chief in charge, and he did come out and reiterate his commitment to the Kuroda policies. So that is essentially defending the yield curve cap, printing more money to buy bonds to defend that cap. And of course, this is bearish for the Japanese yen. Now, I do think at some point he will unwind that, and he'll start to unwind that, but he's not going to want to telegraph it. And the tricky thing with the yen is, although I do favor shorts, there is the risk of the new BOJ chief coming out and actually surprising people, the reversal to an extent. It won't be all in one go, but the reversal somewhat of the yield curve control policy. So there is some risk in Japanese yen shorts. However, I do like the Japanese yen to the downside next week, and especially versus the Swiss franc and the euro. Next is the CAD. Now, I have been tracking this big bear flag in the CAD, and I did say to you, it does look somewhat like an A, B, and possibly a C. And that I would not be surprised, I said in previous videos, if we did come up and test this high. And that essentially would be the bigger A, B, C before somewhere in this area the CAD starts to head lower. But near term, it does look like we have some strength still left to go in the Canadian dollar. And we did have the interest rate decision last week. And although the BOC paused interest rates, they did discuss the continuing of the quantitative tightening, and this was seen as kind of a hawkish pause from the Bank of Canada. Although they had already paused, this wasn't the first pause, but they're at the point where they're pausing interest rates, but they're still providing hawkish rhetoric. So I do think there's room for the Canadian dollar to run into the 0.75630 roughly, and this, any pullback and near-term rally, is what I'd be looking at potentially capturing in New Zealand CAD to the downside, CAD yen to the upside. You can also look at Aussie CAD to the downside, but I prefer those two there for weakness versus a near-term stronger CAD, especially as we're getting a bid in crude oil, which should help push this up into the previous high here. Next is the Australian dollar. I have been highlighting this even when we were rallying to the highs back towards the lows, I did say to you, and although we started to rally higher, we had this big reversal last week, and really what we've got here is just a kind of bear flag pattern. So I am looking for further declines with the dollar still kind of bearish in the scorecards. Maybe we come up and we kind of test the highs once again, and then we start to roll over as the dollar bounces. But for the time being, I do think this is one of the best shorts alongside the New Zealand dollar and also the Japanese yen going into next week. And last but not least, the New Zealand dollar. Now, I have been highlighting ever since we traded into these highs that this was mispriced. This was overvalued essentially based on the overall macro backdrop where we had tightening, even in the US. And we were seeing the same kind of movement to the upside that we saw, after the printing press was turned on after the COVID crash. So this didn't make a lot of sense, and I do think we're coming back down to the lows like I've been suggesting in the Aussie, and even some of these others, the Canadian dollar and also the pound and the euro, as the dollar heads back towards its highs at some point this year. So you can see here the New Zealand dollar couldn't even muster a new high. Unlike the Australian dollar, it couldn't even muster a new high. And maybe it continues to correct a bit, but this is a market that I do favour to the short side going into next week. Certainly Euro New Zealand to the upside and New Zealand franc to the downside, but also New Zealand CAD. As the CAD pushes higher, I would look for an underperformance of the New Zealand. So New Zealand CAD to the downside is something I'm interested in next week. Okay, so let's look at the markets themselves, starting with crude oil. And I am bullish on crude oil going into next week. Any pullback in this market, look for this market to correct, and any pullback is viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish breakouts into the 86, 87. Now again, you can put profits anywhere towards this target, but once you get past the 86 level, the odds for further upside start to turn against you. So consider this as a max profit taking area in crude oil next week. So the first Forex market here is New Zealand franc. Now this is my favorite market heading into next week. Any pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals. I'm going to be looking down towards the 0.55 area in this market. Next is franc yen. Now franc yen has a target which sits, or has a high which sits right in this target. So if we test this previous high at the 150.45, that would be a good target in this market next week. Any pullback in this market, because we are near the highs up here, so I would like to see this pullback first, but any correction would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish breakouts in this market up towards the 151 area. Next is US dollar franc. Now I do like this market to the downside. The scorecards are highlighting this for a short, but I do prefer the New Zealand franc and franc yen, and also Euro New Zealand and Euro yen, these gold markets here. But I will be looking for potential shorts in this market. So any pullback, we've already started to pull back, any continued pullback is viewed as the opportunity, perhaps we retest the low over here, as the opportunity to look for bearish setups down towards the 0.88250 area. Next is Aussie franc. Any correction in this market, and again, I do think the Aussie, don't forget the Aussie and the US dollar are actually the two weakest in the scorecard. So these are definitely things I'd be looking at shorting versus the franc. I just have highlighted these ones because of that momentum to the downside in the New Zealand and the yen. But any pullback in this market, we're lacking a bit of momentum, so I would like to see a correction, would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bearish reversals down towards the 0.5920 area. Okay, so moving on to the euro pairs, and of course the Swiss franc pairs are my favorite setups heading into next week. After that, it is euro strength, especially versus New Zealand and the yen and the dollar and the Aussie. So any pullback in this market, we're quite near the highs, and I do think we're probably going to get a pullback first. So any pullback in this market would be viewed as the opportunity to start to look for bullish setups into the 1.7900 area. Next is euro yen. Now euro yen is right up at the highs, so I would like to see this correct first if you're going to be trading this kind of intra-week. And remember, you're not looking to trade all of these markets. We have a number of markets on the watch list, so we can take advantage of the setups that do appear. Some of these aren't necessarily going to be traded, but they're all on here because they're all good for potential setups. So any pullback in euro yen would be viewed as the opportunity to look for bullish breakouts up towards the 148.50 area. Next is euro dollar. Euro dollar was a market highlighted to the upside last week, and we traded right into the max profit taking zone, and look how it sold off. That's why these are on here. It's so that if you are involved in these and they trade into these areas, you know the odds are now against you for any further upside. So it's a great opportunity to book profits if you're in those pairs. Heading into next week, we did have quite a big sell-off, and it's difficult to say whether this sell-off will continue, but on balance, based on the current scores, I would still be looking at this as a potential correction and look for any bullish breakouts. That would be the opportunity to look for potential longs into the 1.11250 area. Now, the other thing to remember is if you have a market like euro dollar, the good thing if you're trading this intra-week about waiting for breakouts is if the breakout doesn't come, what you'll see is, this market might just trend down like this and there's no breakout and it just trends down for the week. So if you're waiting for those breakouts first in the direction of these highlighted markets, that's going to be the opportunity that provides the least amount of risk because you've already got that rally first in the direction of the overall market. Next is EurAussie. Now I do prefer Euro New Zealand, Euro Yen and Euro Dollar over EurAussie, but any pullback in this market, and I do think we start the week by selling off a bit more, but any pullback is viewed as an opportunity to start to look for any bullish breakout. I'm going to be looking up towards the 1.65750 area. Okay, so wrapping up the Forex pairs here with the Canadian pairs. And last week, New Zealand CAD to the downside was highlighted, and you can see we traded again right into the max profit taking zone. That was the time to book your profits. We did sell off past this towards the end of the week, but even if you had booked your profits down here, there wasn't too much left on the table. But this momentum to the downside, I do think we continue to see this week. So any pullback in this market, and again, remember the Canadian dollar structure, it's like this. We're kind of up here with a little bit left to go. So any pullback in the Canadian dollar, and you see this pulling back, you see this big bear flag, this would be the opportunity to start to look for bearish setups down towards the 0.8200 area. Next is CAD Yen. Now CAD Yen also has a couple of really nice highs in this area. So look for these highs over here, especially this one if you want a more conservative target. But going into next week, if we start to pull back, I am looking for long opportunities only in this market. And if we start to pull back in this area, you can look for bullish setups. And if we break up towards the 101 area, this is where I would consider this. You could say this high to be conservative as a max profit taking opportunity in CAD Yen. And finally, we have Aussie CAD. Now you could also look at US dollar CAD to the downside, but Aussie CAD is a market that we started to sell off. And I do think we could see this lower next week. So any pullback in Aussie CAD is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals. I'm going to be looking down towards the 0.8860 area. So going into next week, my four favorite markets are New Zealand franc, franc yen, Euro New Zealand, Euro yen. But also keep an eye out, especially in the CAD pairs, for New Zealand CAD to the downside and CAD yen to the upside. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold, silver and Bitcoin, and starting with the gold-silver ratio, you can see gold is really underperforming and silver has been the market here, which I've been highlighting for outperformance in previous videos, and it has done very well. I do think because the dollar is still bearish, silver long plays, gold long plays, maybe Bitcoin to the upside as we're getting liquidity coming into the market still. I do think that these are still viable, but the risk is for a reversal in the dollar over the next, say, 4 weeks. So I do still like upside in these markets, but I think upside could be limited over the next 4 weeks. So the first market here is gold, and gold just missed the target area last week, and we had this big sell-off. I do think we could see gold, and this would coincide, if you remember back to the beginning of the video, I talked about the DXYs doing this, but it does look like it could come down and test the key area of broken resistance turning support highlighted at the beginning of the video. So if there is a little bit more downside in the dollar, that would make sense for US dollar franc down a little bit, Euro dollar a bit higher, and also maybe gold and silver a bit higher. And I think gold could very easily retest the 207.521. That is the major high, and it may not do this next week, but if it does test the major high, I think this is most likely, it would make sense that this would be where we could start to see gold rolling over to the downside. I am not convinced we're going to get a major breakout because gold often does very well when the money printer gets fired up, and that will be the case. And I think when that happens, when there is a recession, you will tend to see gold sell off. Then the money printer starts, and that's when gold really starts to outperform. And I think that will be the time when gold will break through the 207.521. But near term, I think not only, keep an eye on gold, because not only could the 207.75, and again, it's a massive key area of resistance, so you could easily trade above this for a number of days. But keep an eye on this, because if gold tops out here, this will also coincide with a potential bottom in the dollar in the near term. So to summarize here, I do think there's a little bit more upside left in gold, but once we get to the 207.521, I think we could actually see gold start to stall out. Next is silver. Looking at this in the daily, and we traded right into the max profit taking zone from last week. This was actually highlighted as a good long play, and it was a very nice long play last week. Coming into this week, I do think there's a bit more upside. As I said, I think we could probably see the dollar coming a bit lower for a week or so. Any pullback in silver, and this has been pretty much a straight line move, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this pullback first. Any pullback would be viewed as the opportunity to look for longs once again into the 26.25 area. And last but not least, we have Bitcoin. I did highlight this area here as the max profit taking area for Bitcoin. And you can see as soon as we traded into this, that was the high in Bitcoin last week. I do still favor on balance Bitcoin to go a bit higher, but we are seeing tech start to underperform. And very often, Bitcoin is going to follow what you see in the NASDAQ in tech. So I do think upside like gold and silver is limited in Bitcoin, but on balance, I do think any pullback next week should be viewed as an opportunity to look for longs up to a max area of the 32.50 area roughly. So that is it for me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the room each day where I go through these markets and the setups that I'm personally looking at with members on a daily basis for over 75 markets in different asset classes, including stocks, bonds, Forex, and commodities. So if you'd like to know more about the benefits of GMT membership, why not check out the link in the description below and in the pinned comment where you can get a 2-week free trial totally risk-free. So have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you all next week.